All right, Brian, what are
Today
we
we have
looking
a
at?
fun topic. Apparently, and we haven't verified this information, it's just a random YouTube video, so take that with a grain of salt. But the claim is that in China, they've developed a robot that uses human brain cells. I think it's important to point out that they did not take a human brain, like a brain out of, they started with stem cells, then they told the stem cells to become brain cells and use that to build out a brain. I think it's fair to say a brain that then controls the robot and acts similar to a human brain. Frankly, it was a little bit light on the details of all that, but I think it does present some fun, ethical, moral questions for us to address, assuming you could make this work and this is a viable thing. The, I mean, Rob, you probably have a bunch of questions, but it's something like, they posed in the video the question of at what point does it become a human? Um, and that does get messier. I think a lot of our research in the book and discussion was around adding to an existing human or taking a silicon-based AI tool, right? And seeing at what point does that become a person? And we're basically saying no, that doesn't ever happen. It will never become a person. But if you took the cells from a human, like at what point does that become a person if that's being integrated from the ground up into the robot?
You're
Uh,
making a human neural network. You're making a human brain. But then
well,
human. It's human. If it's a human brain, it'd be human. It just doesn't have a human body, right?
so that comes down to the question of what is a human,
Mm.
Yeah.
right? What makes a human unique? And this is a question we dive into in depth in Soul's Intelligence in our book, from a philosophical, from a theological, from even a biological perspective. And the the position of most in the AI world, so we're going to say like the big tech companies and your Sam Altman's seems to be, and uh, Mo Gaudat and these types of people, is that a human is essentially a summation of things like emotions and feelings and intelligence and so on. That's what makes a human unique. Specifically, they'll say something like it's our intelligence that makes humans the most unique animals, or they hate to use the word superior, but in our position of power in the world. And so if you define humanity, as a human is uniqueness is intelligence, that is extremely problematic. Within the human race, it is extremely problematic because not everybody has the same level of intelligence. So now you're saying, okay, well, somebody that's more intelligent is worth more, has higher utility value than somebody that's less. And some people get smarter with age. When you start as an infant, as a child, what intelligence do you have? Not much that we can verify. And so does that then make the argument, and this argument is made by certain philosophers, that a infant child is less valuable than a full-grown pig or other animal that can show different levels of intelligence. So intelligence is the defining characteristic of a human is extremely problematic. You do not want to go down that road. It just ends up with very bad outcomes. So this is where I think if the brain is, we're using human cells and to build out a brain from stem cells, does that make it human? And I don't think it does, because you're just continuing that false logic and that false concept of, oh, it's intelligence. They now have an intelligent human-like brain, therefore it must be human, or it must be equivalent to a human in personhood. What do you guys think? Did I set that up clearly?
I
My
think,
perspective on that
yeah.
is that a single part of a human does not make a human, right? So the brain does not make a human. The liver does not make a human. Because you can have all those in a dead body that's not human,
Mm.
right? So it's like just because you have a piece the brain, which might be the impressive piece of the human, does not make a human. So, like, okay, you can put a pig's heart or liver in a machine, or put a machine in a pig's liver, and it's like, okay, is that machine now a heart? Like, well, no, it's still a machine. Is that machine that has, that's keeping the blood pumping through a heart, does that mean that that machine is now a pig? And the answer is no, because we're not composites in that sense where it's like, oh, one piece makes us what we are. Does that mean that it's not going to have some cool capabilities and cool things? Of course it is. Basically, the ability to use biology to play with technology, basically, or to do new things has always been around, right? Now they're just doing it with the brain. That doesn't make it any more human than taking a heart from a thing or a liver from something and saying, "Oh, look, it works with this machine."
Guys, at what point,
But it is going
if
to
this
have
isn't
cool.
going to be, if this isn't going to be human, at what point is this considered by potentially by some governments as a master race? So you can create some cool and powerful stuff that isn't human, but is potentially more intelligent than a majority of humans, can problem solve quicker, I guess, is more durable. We've seen their attack dogs. It talks about these armed dogs that the Indian Army's going to create. Honestly, I'd be more worried if that rifle was strapped to a cat, because we are all dead at that point. Dogs, I feel like you can talk down from the ledge. But yeah, like at what point do we start talking less about creating humans and more about a master race being created?
I think,
Well,
like Brian said, if it's based off of intelligence, which doesn't make sense because it's all kind of bad, which most people are trying to do, there is no such thing as a master race. It can be a more powerful weapon, right? Like they'd be like, okay, we're gonna have a nuke that can determine to launch itself. Like, is that a master race or just a stupid idea that could destroy everything? And so that's where I think we need to differentiate a race, a being, a living thing from a mechanical thing that can do things.
I actually think it's a little
And so I
more
don't think
scary than you set it up, Rob, which is it's infinitely patient. It shows more empathy. It's trained in understanding how to communicate with high levels of empathy. Could you even call that, think of a dog right now, the loyalty that a dog has versus the loyalty of maybe a family member, right? Their excitement at seeing you, their interest in just pleasing you, and so on. So you program that all into a machine that maybe even looks human. And is that now make it like, what does that make it? Because it's going to have more human tendencies. Might even say human virtues uh, than most humans do. The question is still, though, does that make it human or equivalent to? I think a really interesting, and I could share this on my screen, point to make with this is, where's my screen share? That the scientific consensus is that, where's my screen share? There it is. Let me know when this comes up. Is that if you survey a bunch of biologists from 1,058 academic institutions, 96% of them, so these are secular, these are religious, these are all kinds of background, believe that mammalian life begins at conception. Called the fertilization view in this particular paper, but you can just Google that one. Does mammalian life begin according to biologists? 96% believe it begins at conception. So Greg's point of, hey, because I have a pig's heart transferred into a human, is the human now a pig, or into to a robot or whatever? It gets really murky, but it's actually not that complicated. No, it's not. It's not a pig. It's not, you didn't just change the being because of that. The existence of a human being cannot be predicated on the physical capabilities of that being. If it is, you now go down the road of, well, some humans are worth more than other humans. Some humans are stronger than other humans. Some humans are smarter than others. Some are more empathetic. Some are more better at moral reasoning. Whatever thing you're using, becomes now a tool that you could use to value or devalue other human life. And I mean, we've seen how this has happened in Darfur and, Nazis in Burma, and like this isn't good in the South of America, in the US, and all over the world where slavery existed for thousands of years, where you say one human for whatever reason is worth less than another. So I think you have to go back to the basics, to the principles, to the foundation. When does a human life begin? It has to begin in conception. Anything after that, I don't believe. And to be fair, I'm doing all of this off the top of my head without much thought. We just watched this video. So I might be subject to some correction here. But my initial feedback is, if you look at it from any other perspective, you will never end up with a human. Now, if we add in the theological perspective of that, what happens at conception? Well, the soul is infused, and the soul is what makes us unique. Why does that make us unique? Well, because that's the only thing that we can say makes everybody infinitely valuable. There is no physical characteristic that makes a human more valuable than a pig or any other animal. I think the philosophers, the atheist philosophers, actually make this argument very well. Guys like Peter Singer, who talks about we shouldn't do anything to harm it, that an animal is sentient and therefore is equal to humanity, and so on. I think that's, if you don't believe in a human soul, that's a reasonable argument to make. It's that most atheist materialists are not that honest. And so they try and make some other rationalization for what makes a human different. And there is no universal thing because of the different capabilities of humans that we could say, yep, they all have intelligence, they all have moral reasoning. Well, no, some of them are sociopaths. Like, there's nothing else that they all have besides the soul. Once you step away from that, now we come into problems.
I think all this is kind of the modern Frankenstein, right? Which is the concept of, oh, you put a lot of pieces together, you get a being that's human, or whatever. And this is just kind of the next iteration of that. When I say fallacy, it's because that isn't reality. That concept doesn't work. While it can do cool stuff, you can hook up electrodes to a severed arm and get it to twitch and move stuff, right? You can do all this stuff, but even with the brain controlling things or being manipulated or whatever, it's still the whole Frankenstein thing, which is, you're right, it doesn't have a soul, it doesn't have, you know, its own will, its own desires, its own autonomy.
That's a great point, Greg. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you just triggered a really good idea. Like, could this actually be an additional proof of the soul? Like, proving a soul is like proving love. Like, it's through observation. You can't measure it. We can't quantify it, right? So will this machine, using human cells, their brain cells that were created initially from stem cells, have autonomy? Will it have a free will? Or is it still based on whatever the CPU and whatever the training data has told it is a way to navigate? Doesn't mean you can't learn on the fly, but learning on the fly is not the same as a teleology. Teleology is a being that has the ability to set its own goals, right? Learning on the fly and having a free will is not the same as instincts like animals have. Humans are than that. We have beyond just instincts. We can pause and react and think through and rationalize and use logic. A pig or a dog or whatever can't do the same things. So will these machines be able to, even if they use human parts, like a human brain, be able to then demonstrate free will and autonomy? I would suggest no. That might be your hard stop.
It's basically seems like they're training a human neural network, call it, or biological neural network from how they train a computer neural network, right? So yeah, it can adapt to stuff. Yeah, but you still have to train it, give it its goals, give it its stuff, and then the neural network adapts and grows from that and learns from that. None of that made it seem like this is going to have its own goals, its own setting, its own will. Didn't provide that information in the YouTube video at all. And that's what I would ask is like, what did they do? How did they train it? What and all that stuff. But it seems like they're trying to take a basically a biological thing and train it with digital information, digital processes, digital stuff.
So here's
Which,
a question.
that's fine.
Maybe somebody online has the answer. The knowledge that your brain has when you're born with the instincts, whether it's to eat, whether it's to latch on, to feed, whether it's how does your liver work? Like you're born and your parts are working. Like how does your heart know to beat? Where's that knowledge stored? It's an open question. Like I'm not saying it isn't stored. I just don't know. Is there a part of the brain? And then how did it get there? So like if you start with two individual cells at conception that come together, where is it stored in that thing? Then that then becomes the brain, which then functions all your organs.
You're talking about instinct,
Because
Brian, right? Like where does instinct come from?
it's it's more than instincts. It's also how does my baby brain, when you're growing in your mother's womb, know how to make the lungs process oxygen to turn that, put it into your blood, that your heart's pumping, you're like, so the most basic definition of a soul is the thing that makes all of the systems within a being operate together. Right? It's
Oh, I know a lot of
what's your
people say
best
DNA does that.
definition? It's just the basic definition. So it's I want to be clear there. I'm not saying that's 100% comprehensive. It's just the simplest way to think of it. But where does that come from in the physical structure of the brain, or is it non-physical?
Like I said, a lot of people would say it's DNA. Like the DNA gives those instructions, but I think most recent research shows that DNA is more of the scaffolding, like the how do I put this?
DNA is not data storage in the sense that it shows how my understanding of it could be corrected certainly is that the DNA gives you genetic information for cell replication, right? So X cell is going to do this and Y cell is going to do that and so on. It's not a sheet that says, okay, heart cells, when you come together and create the heart and you're pumping blood and whatever, this is how you're going to work with the lungs and this is how you're going to work with the everything else. Like there's something there, digestion, I mean, just the entire system. How did
I
they
think
go from
DNA is
two
one
individual
recipe.
cells at conception that come together to all of that? Because if you could figure that out, then your question, Greg, of how did they train these brains that they grew from stem cells? Did they figure that out? Like, do they know where this information stored? Because if not, how would they ever make the heart work with this brain? Like if they were like, hey, we also want a joint, or we also want some other part of a human that obviously, we have a lot of pieces that connect with our brains. Maybe they just want a physical robot, but they want skin over top of it. So it's very human-like in its appearance. Okay, well, how does that brain that they grew know to communicate with the skin to replicate skin cells and to shed the cells and on and on and on the things that the epidermis does? I don't know. But I do think the core question of what's the best way to phrase that? Will it have autonomy? I think is the simplest way without a soul. If they just grow a bunch of cells, is it ever going to demonstrate its teleology is the core? And does that, if it doesn't, and if it can't, and if that's the hard stop that nope, it's always got to be trained,
Well,
it can't go against its training data, is that a further proof for the existence of the human soul?
these cells came from a person, right? Where is
They
that?
have to. Well, did it say they came from a human? That's a good question. Could they have gotten brain cells from a different animal?
We've got the beta culture. I wonder if it's something like that. The immortal human cell culture.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Did it say human cells or maybe rat cells for all I know? Rat brain cells would probably be better, be simpler to work with.
It depends on your goal,
Well, that's true. That's true.
right?
If you
If you
want
believe there's something,
these rats, if you want to, what now?
if you believe there's something unique about the human brain, then other than data storage, neural network, and neural connections and information processing, if there's something else about it that gives it the ability to have autonomy and free will, well, then you're going to use a human. Plus, in China, I don't know.
Before we even talk about it being human, maybe we should talk about whether or not it's actually alive. I mean, parts of it are alive, but is it individual cells that are alive that are just together working, like the slime mold? They're just kind of working all together, but it's not really a living thing. It's
The
not
slime mold's a living thing.
well, I mean, it's not a thing, it's things. It's
Well, okay. Yeah, but it's alive.
alive. So is this alive? Are these alive? They're alive in some way, at least part of
Yeah,
them.
I think the
Alive.
cells themselves are clearly alive, which brings up a question: how are they getting fed?
That's
How
what I
are
was
they?
wondering too. Or is it just a temporary thing? So like when someone dies, their fingernails still grow, even though they're not alive, because it's still doing the process of, taking nutrients out of whatever it is. And they never really got into how long this thing is working or any of that stuff. So we don't know if they are continually giving it more energy,
Food.
whatever you want to say, to keep.
Really made me think John dies at the end. Has anybody seen that? Come on.
Seen what?
John dies at the end. Nobody has seen that movie.
I don't think so.
Nobody's read the book. And there were spiders inside it. Nobody's read either one of those.
No.
That's a problem. John dies at the end. At least watch the movie. I mean, it's not great, but at least you get the idea.
All right.
So I think the problem is saying the cells are living. I'm not sure you can say the rest of it is living.
I think the reality of this being a sustainable system anytime soon seems highly unlikely. But I think from a theoretical perspective or discussion of, okay, what if they, attached a bag of glucose water and they just fed the cells and that was all it needed and somehow that was healthy enough for it and blah blah blah. Okay, that's a fun theoretical discussion. But I feel like there's a lot of hurdles to have a sustained human cells communicating, working together over a long term and not need to like literally give it a lobotomy every so often uh, because it died out.
The other thing, it's not working as one thing on its own, right? So like I think kind of like we mentioned, your different body parts react to survive, to live. I'm not sure this does. Like the cells individually will react for them to live, but it doesn't react for the rest of the non-biological robot to live, right? So it's not like, oh, the rest of you isn't getting power because it has no idea about that power consumption by the rest of the robot. It doesn't know about any of that stuff. It's not considered
Well,
trying to survive those, keep those things alive, in essence.
that's interesting point. So you're basically going into the fact of a slime mold, as Chuck is, I think, is an excellent example. It is millions of individual organisms. They work together, but there isn't a single consciousness. So you can't. It's not a multicellular organism. So several of the theories of consciousness believe that it is a result of the structure of the human brain. So if they can replicate the structure of the human brain, that theory would then show, okay, consciousness arises and it just shows up. So this is an interesting experiment because it could help prove or disprove that theory that if the theory is it's a result of the physical structure and they build the physical structure of the brain and no consciousness shows up, which has to have some level of teleology, of goal setting, of autonomy, of a free will, then your theory is wrong. That isn't where consciousness comes from.
I think the slime mold kind of gives us some insight into that theory, anyways. Because they don't have a brain or neural network, but they have goals. They have all of that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, communication systems, where did that come from? Like how did the information for them to know how to communicate precede the actual ability to communicate so that each one, like it, there's a lot of fundamental questions that come up there, but that's an interesting thought experiment, Greg. So if you grow 1 billion brain cells, does it ever work together in a separate multicellular strategy, or is it just like slime molds where they're kind of communicating because whatever's built into those stem cells for the knowledge and information allows them to sort of work together? You know, input A comes with output B, right? So more of a reaction to stimuli. Maybe even it's fair to say there. But is it actually like your brain is telling you you're hungry and you need food to survive, or you need water? Like that's a very, and why does it know that? Well, other systems in your body are informing it of these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just your brain telling your body to do everything. Your body's also telling your brain things, and different systems and organs all do the same thing. It all is basically an interconnected system that if you take one out of the system, it throws things off. Like it's tough for your body to manage it. It does its best, but it's a very intricate system where
But
it's
sometimes
all
they can be
interconnected.
artificially replaced.
Yeah,
Right.
correct. That's what I said. Like a liver, you can, or liver, you know, you can do your the implants for your heart to keep that beating in the right pace when
Pacemakers and
things get
stuff,
off.
right?
Yeah,
All right, I want to change tack just for a second on the same subject. Parking the human element of it in terms of what makes it human. Why do you think that we keep creating these things in the form of a human or a dog? You know, we know as marketers that like if you put names to things, that makes us feel more attached to them. Like, is that what's happening here? Like with putting this robot into a human form when it's not a human, which is what we're saying. Like, why would we do that?
Oh man, so many reasons. I think one
yeah,
might be just a general, you can take it from one other way, either a lack of creativity or a human form is very well optimized. So what do I mean by that? So we're not as fast as a cheetah, we can't swim as fast as a shark, we can't jump as high as a grasshopper, relative to our body size or whatever. We can't fly, but we can do overall everything on average better than everything else, right? Like the diversity of what we can do with the human body, from climbing to riding bicycles or driving race cars at 200 miles an hour. Like there's nothing else that has that vast amount of capabilities. So to some degree, they're replicating the best general purpose, maybe, system that we've seen. And so when I say lack of creativity, they haven't come up with a better system that can do all of these things.
Most robots don't really look human, though. I mean, really, I've got here at the house probably 4 or 5 different robots, and none of them look human at all. I mean, from the Yarbo to the Roomba to the, I know
Yeah,
where,
those are all very specific purpose though, right?
yeah, they're all specific
Yeah,
use.
so I think that's true. You can optimize for a very specific, like one type thing. But once you start to get general purpose, I got to go over terrain and I got to climb things and I got to do whatever. The human form is hard to beat.
Oh, well, 4 legs.
um,
4 legs.
yeah. Well, in that case, yeah. So for the military dog thing, 4 legs are better than two for stability reasons and terrain reasons. Um, but it's basically you're optimizing for what your goal is. So if it is general purpose, humans are a good example. If it's for swimming, you're not going to really take a human or a dog. You're going to take,
Right.
something else. Slithering. They have snakes that they've created that are mechanical snakes to reproduce that system. Birds, same kind of concept. But we do find out that not each animal is actually optimized, right? That's why we don't have planes that flap wings,
Right?
right? We found better systems to optimize for things. But so, like Brian said, one is, yeah, it's a good general thing, but also humans, 2 things: curiosity, how humans work and why would they work. So they think any little bit of more knowledge about humans, whether it's the brain, whether it's parts, whether it's whatever, that'll be good. Also to save ourselves, right? So it's like, oh, if I get to a point where I can't do this, I need to be able to transplant something in. I need to be able to cryogenically freeze myself so I can be resurrected once we figure out this cure. I need to like, there's a lot that can go into that kind of stuff because humans are very egocentric. So it's like, hey, if I can make something that can save me or keep me running longer or whatever, we like to do that because it sounds amazing. Like, oh, I can live forever. Let's just build these systems and learn.
Because I see here in the near future, we're probably going to have bots at fast food places. They're like handing you your order and stuff. And I think it's a comfort thing. I don't know that they'll look like humans, but they'll definitely be humanoid. They'll definitely be android of some kind, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, maybe a big round screen thing right there, so people feel comfortable that it's not that uncanny valley human thing where it's faking being human, but it'll be humanoid, so we feel comfortable with it. You know, we don't want
Humans are
to freak people out.
humans are naturally wired or trained to see human things in non-human things, right? So the man in the moon, facing the tree, you name it, that's what we see. And so it's like, okay, that's our recognition of things to make us connect to it better, to whatever. Like we humanize animals all the time, right? We're like, oh, this animal blank blank blank. It's like, do you really think it had that full on emotional, logical, thought out process for that cat that did that? Probably not. There are some instances where you can say, yeah, that's how they are, so they'll do that. But most of the times, it's us humanizing animals, or I forget what that's called. There's a more technical term for that. But yeah, it goes in that. We like doing that kind of stuff. We think we're awesome, so let's reproduce us in different ways.
Do you think that's going to make AI more scary? Because it looks like a human, but it's not a human. Like if people build robots with this kind of brain in it that we've seen in this video, do you think that's going to make AI more or less approachable to the average Joe?
I think if you went and talked to 100 people on the streets about, hey, they're growing a human brain in cyborgs. Does that sound fun to you? I think most people are gonna be like, what are you talking like? I think I don't know that that's gonna be well received. I'm pretty sure that the presidential candidate that stands up and says, hey, I'm putting human brains in robots, it's gonna be great. This is not gonna get
I think they stick them in these dogs and then they put them over the mountain and they take over the next country. That's the way I don't see these like helping people in their houses and stuff. I don't think that's what China and India are building over there. These are not like robot butlers and taxi drivers. They're there to kill people. That's what they're building.
Well, it could be worse than that, Chuck. If you can imagine worse than that. I mean, look at Mao's China. What did they do? They sacrificed 30 million people. Somewhere around there. We don't have good records on it, but tens of millions of people, could be 30 or more, for a better world. Right? So what if you could just replace all the low and again, if humans are just intelligence, the inferior humans with superior machines, and then the superior humans, the higher classes, the elites, the whatever, now don't have to deal with all of these pesky humans that make waste and harm the environment and all these things.
Hold on, I need to go back a step on China versus India, because I do think in China they have a very different situation than India. In China, they actually have a population that's getting old.
Yeah.
Fast. So they really do need a lot of these machines to help take care of people. So in China's case, I'm not saying it's all military. Definitely their flying drones are, but the majority of the robot stuff I think is for infrastructure, taking care of people or doing things like that. Whereas in India, I think it might be kind of more like the military thing. I mean, it's not like that in China, but definitely
But
very
even
hard.
if that's China's goal, they have a history. The Chinese Communist Party has a history of sacrificing tens of millions of people to further their goals.
Yes, even to this day.
Right? Like they're not against that.
No,
So
because they're a super organism as a nation. They think of themselves as China. They are China. That's not, you don't see that in a lot of other countries. In the United States, we're Americans, but what does that even mean? It means we're individuals.
yeah, versus collectivists for
From
sure.
state to state, from block to block, from neighborhood to neighborhood. So it's a cultural mentality shift. All for one for
This
all.
video is gonna get banned.
I wish.
Yeah.
We
How
should
do
just
we
get
how do we wrap this up back to the stem cells and the artificial brain? What's the takeaway here?
Well, I still think part of the takeaway is this could further prove our thesis in our book, right? In Soulless Intelligence, where we say the uniqueness of the human comes from the soul. The soul then produces things like a free will, teleology, the ability to set goals, autonomy. And this will further prove that just building out a brain from stem cells isn't going to create a robot that has those things. It might be able to process information extremely well, might be able to store data extremely efficiently, much more efficiently than silicon-based programming systems right now in computers, but it doesn't mean it's going to have the hallmarks of the human soul. And I think these types of experiments will further prove that. Now, they'll be really good at mimicking a human, but when you boil it down, it's going to be in the data set, whatever they're doing. It's not something that's going to ever be unique.